Hello and welcome to This Week in Oklahoma Politics. I'm your host, KOSU's Michael Cross, along with ACLU Oklahoma Executive Director Ryan Kiesel and Republican political consultant Neva Hill. Well, on Wednesday, an Oklahoma judge ruled unconstitutional the statute in the state's execution law requiring secrecy in the lethal drug use to kill those on death row. Now, Neva, what does this mean for the future of executions in this state?
Well, I don't know exactly what it means because I think the Attorney General... The Attorney General moved very quickly on Wednesday afternoon to say that they would appeal the ruling. And, several things I thought were interesting in what he pointed out. First of all, he said the entire reason for Oklahoma's confidentiality statute really was to protect those who provide lethal injection from being in a position to have threats or coercion or intimidation. But he also said that this is something that has been litigated before, both at the state and federal level, and has been found to be constitutional. So obviously the Attorney General's office was disappointed, and I think it does point to the bigger picture of a lot of other states that have pending either laws or issues very similar to what's going on in Oklahoma. It causes everybody to step back based on this one ruling and have to wait and see.
Ryan, what were your thoughts?
I think Judge Parrish's comments where she said, I don't think this is even a close call, are telling. And when we look at this issue in its totality, what we have is the exercise of the greatest authority that government has over its people, and that is to strap them down to a table, put a needle in their arm, and take their life. If you look at people on the left and the right that have a healthy skepticism of government and the exercise of power from requiring people to enroll in health care to curriculum, we're going to talk about Common Core, I think, here in a minute, and whether the government is overstepping its reach there from the federal level into state politics. Here we have the exercise of power where we're actually taking somebody's life. I don't think that there should be any question as to whether that should be secret. And matter of fact, it shouldn't. It should be open and transparent.
Neva, there's going to be a couple of executions that are possible, kind of waiting in the wings right now.
Right.
Will we see these executions? Do you think they'll delay them and wait for them?
I think there very well may be a delay, but I think the point I would make to kind of counter what Ryan is saying is that these are executions that have gone through the full process. The question that really is at hand is about the drugs being used, the fact that the drugs are not being disclosed, and I think the counter to that is that there are very legitimate reasons why that has not taken place. So I think we're kind of confusing two issues here somewhat.
Ryan, what about this? We're talking about secrecy here, and,
right.
and there are a lot of people who say we should have more openness in government. Should this be one of those things that should be open? And Neva's saying no because that protects the pharmacies that are providing these.
But otherwise, we're using these defendants as human guinea pigs, and we're experimenting with different drug protocols with them. The reason we find ourselves in this situation is that other countries as well as other states have begun to move away from capital punishment, and we've seen a shortage in these drugs. And the state of Oklahoma right now, we don't even know whether they've got the drugs to use to execute these individuals, and then they're beginning to experiment with different protocols. So I think that if you're a defendant right now and you're saying, I have an Eighth Amendment constitutional right to not receive cruel and unusual punishment, you have to be able to test that somehow. And if you can't even look at the drugs and what kind of drugs they're going to use, the condition of them, the testing of them, the purity of them, then you can't even test that, and you find yourself in this Kafkaesque position.
But Oklahoma's was the first to use lethal injection back in 1977 when it started. The issue has only come to bear recently with this whole idea that the combination of drugs or something that there's something different than what's gone on in the past. And frankly, that's what put all of this at bay, is that you have these companies with stockholders, with a business concern saying we don't want to be embroiled in something that is far outside the scope of just providing a legal drug that would be used for these lethal injections.
Yeah, and it's that shortage and the having to determine what kinds of drugs we're going to use to murder individuals in the state of Oklahoma, the state executing individuals. So it's I think that we should know where they're coming from, what drugs are being used, the purity, so that we, at the very least, so that these defendants can test whether their Eighth Amendment rights are being violated.
And we'll know more when they go through the appellate process.
Yeah.
Now, the Senate Education Committee passed on to the full Senate House Bill 3399 scrapping Common Core and putting the job of creating new standards in the hands of State Superintendent Janet Barisi. Ryan, what did you think of this bill?
Yeah, I think this has less to do with education policy than it does to do with education politics. And in particular, among Republicans, we're seeing this debate play out not just in Oklahoma, but at the national level. We have national Republican figures like Jeb Bush that have been champions of Common Core, and even Governor Mary Fallin, who at one point had been a champion of Common Core, but then has begun to step back a little bit and criticize potential federal involvement. And I think that what we've seen is a lot of myths and some paranoia about the implementation of Common Core that have then been confused with what I would consider legitimate criticisms of Common Core. Whether the implementation's been too fast, whether they're over-reliance on testing. So this has become a debate that unfortunately has left the policy on the table or off the table, and it's really become about politics front and center.
Neva, the conservative state chamber has said that they don't want this bill to go forward because it's going to hurt education. What were your thoughts on this?
Well, we're somewhat in a semantics game. I mean, everyone has to posture, and I think Ryan's point is well taken that it's an election year. I think the 11-0 vote coming out of the committee in the Senate Education Committee is clear evidence that they wanted to do what they needed to do to make a statement, deal with the issue for the moment, and then be able to move forward down the road. And so it's how many winners and losers do you have at the end of the process? And I think the upshot right now is that there are more winners than losers. I think everyone agrees that raising education standards, increasing classroom rigor are essential. Some of the big talking points for the chamber themselves about making these students be able to be not only college bound if they choose to be, but be able to be workforce ready. So no one really debates the big overarching issues on education. It's all the details. It's about the federal intrusion aspect. And I think those were some of the points that I think the Republicans in the legislature wanted to make sure for the folks back home that they made clear statements that, look, we get it. We understand the concerns that are out there. We understand the outcry. But I think it's somewhat an end game of having to do what is necessary now to kind of revisit this in the future.
Ryan, this bill puts us back in the hands of the Board of Education before the 2010 passage of Common Core. Is that something that seems viable, that we can basically give it back to the Board of Education before 2010?
Yeah, I think that what we're looking at with the implementation here is we've had over 3 years now of school districts around the state going through the process, the very expensive process of getting Common Core ready. And so if we at this point, if the legislature moves forward this legislation and hits the pause button or turns it off entirely, then those 3 years would have been for naught. And I think that a more productive conversation here would be less about posturing about who necessarily ends up with control, whether that's the State Board of Education or even some of these larger, more grandiose claims that this is President Obama coming in to take over curriculum in the state of Oklahoma, which is just absurd. These are standards that were developed by Oklahomans. That's I think what's being lost in the current debate in the legislature right now, where you've got folks posturing themselves, not just for November, but I think trying to insulate themselves from challenges in primaries.
I do think in the Senate committee substitute, what you did have was some very clear language that kind of restated some of the key points that folks wanted to know was actually part of the debate and part of the process. And for instance, giving school districts the exclusive right to determine the instructional materials, curriculum, reading lesson, and so on. So there were some key things that did surface after a lot of negotiating, a lot of hammering this out. They didn't just walk into a meeting with something that no one had read. The folks that really care about this subject on both sides, I think, had an opportunity to really get their points made and engage in the debate. And it's a long-term debate. I think we all agree on that. So I think we're making steady progress, not as much as some would like, but at least I don't believe we're going backward.
Now, on Monday, teachers from across the state are coming to the state capitol to rally on everything from funding, to pay, to class sizes. Neva, is Monday's rally this generation's House Bill 1017 March in 1990, which resulted in education reforms?
I think it remains to be seen. I mean, if I had to speculate really on numbers, I would say it certainly is going to fall short of something that we saw with 1017 years ago. But I do think that it again kind of puts this pressure on the whole debate and whole discussion, and there is a healthy part of that process to make sure that these ideas are brought forward. Teachers have concerns, educators across the board, whether they're administrators in the classroom, parents, everyone needs to have their voice heard, and what better place than with the lawmakers at the state capitol.
Ryan, Governor Fallon released a statement saying that she neither supported nor denied the rally itself, but said that she gave $120 million last year. She promised $50 million more this year. What are your thoughts on that?
We're over $200 million short of pre-recession funding levels for education. We're 49th in the nation in per pupil spending. We're last in our region. And then we still have this idea of considering tax cuts, income tax cuts for this legislative session. We have the horizontal deep drilling credit where if you look at some of the reporting on KOSU recently that talks about how even people in the oil business are saying it doesn't incentivize behavior, and we're throwing hundreds of millions of dollars down the drain that could be invested in core services in the state of Oklahoma. This rally, I think, is an opportunity to put education front and center before legislators. They need to, and it's a shame that they need to, but I think that a lot of legislators need to be reminded that education, both for parents, for teachers, administrators, and most importantly for students, is fallen way short as a priority at the legislature over the last several years.
The flip side is that the dollars are there in many of these districts. It's about prioritizing. There will never be enough dollars for education if we want to take into account the laundry list of everything that people in education would like to have. There are key parts of that, though, that do need to be addressed. Teacher pay is one of those areas. And frankly, I mean, even when you look at Janet Barisi in her own campaign, she's been one advocating that there is the possibility for a $2,000 across-the-board pay raise for teachers just based upon what they have in their funds right now. So it gets down to, whose ox gets gored. It gets down to, where do you put the dollars once you get them into the system? And I think that's the big problem. Let's bring it back down to the local level and make these local school boards and districts more accountable.
But if we don't give those local school boards the funding that they need to accomplish those things, then I think that we're not really giving them what the tools that they need to implement those changes and to bring about those changes at the local level. Now, I think that one of the things that parents and teachers and administrators hear over and over out at the Capitol is, oh, hey, we'd love to help you, but the money's just not there. And that's just not the case. The money is there, but it's not there whenever you consider things like tax cuts in a time whenever we're still at pre-recession funding levels and continuing tax credits for corporations and entities and services that don't need them to incentivize activity that they would do anyways, like deep drilling.
There we go. And Ryan and Neva's comments do not necessarily reflect the views of the ACLU, KOSU, its